The recording in a moment, as soon as I'm sure the streaming pages are working. Yeah. Let's get this party started. All right. Morena Tato. Welcome, everybody. Everyone's streaming in here. Welcome to another Q&A here at Digital Boost. I'm Georgia Hatchis. I'm your host. Today, we've got Ali Garside with us from Mosh Social Media. Welcome back, Ali. Ali's been with us a few times. My predecessor, Anamari, had the pleasure of dragging him in and mining him for all of his information. And I am just going to beat that dead horse. I am going to grab every last bit of you, Ali, and have you present that to us today. We're talking about exploring paid social media. And Ali and I were having a little chat before we started, and I'm really excited to see what he has to share. You are going to have questions. There are going to be a lot of questions that you have. Please pop them into the Q&A. I will field them for Ali, and don't be shy, because that's what he's here for. I mean, not for you to be shy, for you to come out of your shell and ask your questions. Yeah. Welcome, Ali. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you for having me. Yeah, definitely stoked to be back. And yeah, as you mentioned, I always, part of my job is I do trainings like this all the time. And I find that, people are nervous to ask questions. But in my opinion, the only stupid question is the one that doesn't get asked. Because I guarantee you, if you've got a question that you think is dumb, there's probably 2 or 3 other people in the room who also want to ask that question, but think it's dumb too, so they won't. So just go for it.
I'm always the one asking those questions, so don't worry.
Me too, actually. Cool. All right. Well, I do have a little bit of I've got some slides. Everybody loves slides. So I'll start sharing my screen and we'll go through some stuff. So I'm going to give you guys a bit of a background and sort of the state of social media in New Zealand as it stands at the moment. And then a rundown of all the different sort of paid optimizations that primarily these examples are going to be around Meta, so Facebook and Instagram. The reason why I use them as a primary example is that all of the other platforms have kind of just stolen their ads manager platform anyway. So if you know the basics of how it works on Facebook and Meta and Instagram, you'll know the basics of how it works on TikTok, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, X, whatever you want to try and use, right? So the principles are kind of the same. There are some specific nuances, but generally speaking, if you can do one, you can do them all. So first off, obviously, just a background on social media in New Zealand, kind of where the state of social media in New Zealand is at the moment. So in terms of overall use, is this covering? I might just move this up here in case that's covering. In terms of overall use, as of January 2023, there were about 4.2 million social media users in New Zealand. So about 81% of the total population of the country uses at least one social media platform a month. On average, you can actually see down here in this green slide in the bottom left, it's actually split across about 6 different platforms. Sounds like a lot, but you start thinking about the kind of platforms that you have. Like for me, I've got Facebook, Instagram, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, LinkedIn, Twitter /X. So I'm already at 6, and that's about half of the platforms that I've got. So, it's the attention of your audience is split across a number of different platforms, but they'll use the different platforms in different ways. So Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, for example, those will be logged in multiple times a day. A platform like LinkedIn, they may only log in once or twice a week. So understanding the nuances of how people use social means that when we actually put our content out there and we use the paid activity, especially to promote it, has different implications. So LinkedIn, for example, you might want to promote your content for 7 days because you know your audience is only logging in once or twice a week, maybe. If you only run your promotion for 24 hours, potentially there's a whole bunch of your audience that hasn't logged on and you miss it. Things like that we've got to think about. The other key stat that I wanted to point out on this slide is the blue one in the bottom left. So the average time spent using social media each day, 2 hours and 15 minutes on average as of January 2023. So people are spending a lot of time on these platforms. For a number of different reasons, primarily to stay in touch with friends and family. That's kind of the number one reported reason why people use social media. But they also now increasingly are using it as a source of news, as a source of brand research as well. So I think the last time I checked this, the biggest search engines in the world in order were Google, YouTube, Facebook. So people actually use the search functions on social media platforms like YouTube, like Facebook, to actually find stuff. So keeping that in mind as well. But again, it'll be different amounts of time spent on different platforms. TikTok, for example, the global average amount of time spent on TikTok is about 50 minutes a day, which is by far and away the best, the most out of all of these platforms. We'll go into a little bit more about how they do that when I get to the TikTok specific slide, but yeah. So key takeaways from this, there's a lot of people who use social media. They spend a lot of time on there. It is a fractured landscape though. So being available on as many different platforms as you can comfortably service will be a good strategy for kind of any business really. And then you just change the priority that you give to different ones.
So I see that Sandra's come right out of the gate with a question,
yes,
which is what we asked for. I'm going to ask the question, but you let me know if you think you'll cover it more a little bit later if we want to go right into it now. So the question is, why am I still seeing Shop Now buttons on Instagram for NZ sites?
Well, the Shop Now button, so that's not necessarily, that call to action button is not necessarily linking people to an Instagram shop. I think the question is the fact that Instagram shops have been deprecated in New Zealand. Now they've turned that functionality off. But the Shop Now button is just, you can choose from a list of different call to action buttons, you know, learn more, get offer, book now, whatever, depending on what you're trying to get the audience member to do. Generally speaking, if you click that Shop Now button, it's probably just taking you to an e-commerce website as opposed to a shop on Instagram. So that button's never going to go away. It's just not going to lead to an Instagram shop anymore.
Right. Thank you.
No worries. So in terms of the specific platforms, we look at Facebook first. So Facebook, by far and away, largest audience in New Zealand. And also based on self-reported stats on the platform that is most often used, it's still number one in this country as well. So, you know, you've got obviously the cultural thought that Facebook is kind of falling out of relevance with a younger audience, less people are using it, etc. That is true to an extent, but the fact that they had, you know, up until last year, they had over 3 million users. It's going to take a while for that to fall away and for people to really actually all just uninstall Facebook and move somewhere else. So they still have the broadest reach. They've got the best and most well fleshed out advertising platform out of all of these different platforms. So we can see here just under 3 million. They did drop. So you can see in the quarter on quarter change numbers in the top right there, they lost about 100,000 users in New Zealand year on year to January this year. That's a trend that we expect to continue to see happening.
And are these users, just a quick question, are these users moving to a different kind of social media platform, or are they just going no more social media, or are they all dying? What's happening there?
It'll mostly be people just getting off Facebook. They'll still be using social media in other way, shape, or form. Most of them will probably be either migrating to a combination of like Instagram and TikTok as their primary socials, and just because Facebook bad, they're moving away from that one, which is fine. That's kind of to be expected, being the incumbent. Everybody kind of moves away from you there. But still the biggest platform in New Zealand, still the largest proportion of over 35s. And if you think about it from a marketing and a business point of view, the over 35s are kind of the people who have all of the money. So potentially just because the young audience isn't necessarily using Instagram as much, Facebook as much, there's still potentially a usage case for it. I wouldn't discount it altogether, but depending on who your target audience is, you may want to prioritize other platforms as well. But yeah, definitely the one thing that it's really good for is reaching a lot of people, driving a lot of front-end traffic as well. So click-through rates are still relatively good. Your CPMs, cost per thousand people, cost per thousand impressions, still really low compared to like Instagram or TikTok. So you can still get good bang for your buck. Engagement rates are pretty low compared to other platforms. People prefer to engage elsewhere rather than on Facebook, but still very much a viable platform to keep in the platform mix for sure.
But engagement doesn't necessarily convert to sales. I feel like a lot of, it can do, but I do feel like it's a lot of time you're spending. For example, on Instagram, if you're talking back and forth with people, it's a lot of time you're putting in where you're saying the engagement here might not be as much, but sales will still happen.
Yeah, exactly. Like conversion optimized advertising, driving actual, like especially e-commerce sales, is actually still really, really viable on Facebook because of the size and the sophistication of the advertising platform. It's obviously got the most data. It's been around for the longest. It does still work really well. So one of our clients, for example, is Hell Pizza. their primary sales drivers now is basically done through social, and it's mostly done. Most of that still comes from Facebook. Compared to they've got Instagram and TikTok as well. We still see the highest return on ad spend coming from Facebook directly. So and engagement isn't necessarily the be all and end all. It's great for building, like for the branding side of the exercise on social media, but in terms of actually driving objectives, yeah, it's not necessarily the be all and end all. Social media's kind of moved away from everybody going, oh, engagement is the most important thing. It's like, well, there's a lot of other stuff we can do. Let's focus on that as well. Sweet. So then moving on to the next big one, Instagram. So they have had a big drop in users. You can see here year on year, they lost about 250,000 users. These numbers, by the way, these are all based on the reported ad reach from within the platform. So you look at the platform and say, how many people can I advertise to on Instagram in New Zealand? It'll say X number, compared that to last year. That changes where these numbers are coming from. So take them with a little bit of a grain of salt, but they're probably the closest metric we can get to real-time users. So about 2.15 million users here. Instagram, however, is where, if you're doing branding exercising, is where the engagement rates are much higher on Instagram than they are on Facebook or any other platform, really. And if you're not a business that doesn't have a presence on TikTok, but you still want to engage that TikTok audience, this is the second best platform to do so. Globally, there are more people who have an Instagram account and a TikTok account than have an Instagram account and a Facebook account. So the crossover between those two platforms is very, very high, and intentionally so. Instagram is a platform that Meta uses essentially to basically, I can say this in the nicest way possible, steal really nice functions from other platforms and makes them their own. So you think like stories that they copied from Snapchat. Reels is just an exact copy of TikTok. So they use Instagram as a way to keep their younger audience and stop them from migrating to other platforms. As we can see here, it's kind of not really working. But because they've been doing that with Reels, for example, they've been incentivizing people to create Reels. So you can get a lot of extra reach if you use Reels content. Organic reach as well for free is much higher on Reels than it is on other parts of the platform, because the actual algorithm that delivers that content is different from the main one that delivers it through your feed, right? So you put something like just a post on your feed, a static post, that's primarily organically going to get delivered to the people who follow you first. If you create a reel and just do it organically again without the paid stuff, it's the algorithm that's delivering that content is actually delivering it to people who don't follow you, but might be interested in your content based on the content that they already view. Much more similar to the way that TikTok delivers content, as opposed to traditionally how they've done it before. So if you're not using Reels, but you're on Instagram, you're missing a key potential to reach a new audience that are potentially going to be interested in your message, but you're not delivering anything to them because you're not using Reels. So, and they use it, 20% of time on Instagram is spent watching Reels now. So you should definitely be getting in on that if you're not. And then moving down, funnily enough, to TikTok, 1.65 million. Now, these numbers, I do have to caveat, they're 18 only. They won't report on numbers under 18 for safety reasons. So I'd say maybe add probably another 150,000 to that number. So getting much closer to 2 million now. But this is where that sort of the 13 to 35 audience makes up almost 3/4 of the entire audience on TikTok. So 3/4 of their audience is sort of under the age of 35, under the age of 40, right? So if they are a key target demographic that you're looking to advertise to, this is kind of the social media platform of choice. And as I mentioned, because that algorithm is the way that this platform delivers content is that it's delivering content to you based on what you're already watching, as opposed to your friends. Like it doesn't really care too much about what your friends are doing. That's what the sort of your following feed is for. But the For You page is primarily designed to deliver you more content based on what you're already looking at and what you're enjoying. And that's why the watch time is so high, that 50-minute on average time spent, because they've basically nailed the sort of recommendation-based algorithm to keep you watching that stuff for more and more. In terms of paid advertising, they are slowly building out their advertising platform. It's a little bit mid now compared to, say, Facebook or Instagram, but it is definitely better than it was a year ago and is getting better all the time. Conversions, like they've started adding in much more robust conversion optimizations compared to this time last year. So starting to challenge Meta in that space for trying to become like an e-commerce platform. And in terms of like trends and the content, so as we kind of move towards a privacy first internet, a lot of our like third-party data touch points and our targeting is becoming a little bit less granular as it used to be. Meta's removing specific targeting options to make them more broad, ostensibly for privacy reasons. But what that also means is that content and the creative that we put out there is going to become much more important in terms of how successful our campaigns are. Before, you used to be able to hide mediocre creative between really excellent targeting. Starting to become a little bit less of a situation there. TikTok is a platform that is one that you can, even if you don't use it, is one that you should be watching very closely for things, for the styles of content that are resonating with this young and potentially cashed up, but young and taste-making audience. So the style of content that works on TikTok can work on basically any other platform as well. Doesn't necessarily work the other way, right? Content that really works well on Facebook doesn't necessarily work on TikTok, but the other way around, it definitely does.
What kind of content specifically are you like? What would you be keeping an eye out for? What do you notice, like certain trends, or what are you seeing?
So you look for trending content, yes. Now, when I say trending content, I don't necessarily mean like, the latest Pedro Pascal eating a sandwich meme or whatever. Those are great, but chasing those, especially as you get into larger organizations where approvals become longer, you're potentially just going to miss it, and it's not necessarily going to be relevant. But you look for the type of content that's been trending for like the last 18 months. So you think of things like get ready with me style content, 3 reasons why I did this versus this, life hacks, things in my blah blah that just makes sense, or this is your sign to get X, Y, and Z, right? Once you kind of think about it, you actually notice that there's types of content that you've been seeing for ages on a platform like TikTok. If they stick around that long on such an ephemeral and finicky platform such as that, that there's a value in there to the audience. So those are the kind of things that you should look at and say, okay, how can I translate this to my business? That's kind of, and also using like green screen video has become kind of like the new unboxing style stuff. So you just put a fake story on a news page, or you put your own website up and you talk to it over a green screen. It even as lo-fi as like having no offense, I'm not going to call you out here, Georgia, but having like the one earbud in with the earbud microphone up to you, that's lo-fi, but it's much closer to that traditional style of people selling to people than just brands trying to sell to you. And that's kind of what's working at the moment. And it's all kind of been pioneering on TikTok.
Lo-fi is my jam. That's the thing. I like. This is my brand. I'm lo-fi AF.
Yeah.
Everybody. We do have a couple questions in here though, before we continue. Okay. Were we able to use TikTok for paid ads irrespective of having a TikTok content page?
Correct. Yes, you can. So you can create ads on TikTok without having a profile itself.
Great.
I would, I would experiment with both. But it is just because if you want to try and build any sort of community around your brand without having a TikTok account, obviously you can't do that. So just keep that in mind. Yeah. But what that's actually really good for,
No, go ahead.
What's really good that is that you can, as an advertiser, even without a TikTok account, you can use Spark ads, which are essentially you as an advertiser promoting content from anybody on TikTok. You basically contact them, say, hey, I saw this, I want to use this for an ad, or you engage with UGC content creators to create content for you. They post it to their account, they give you an authorization code, and then you promote it. So it still looks like it's coming from the creator. There'll be a paid partnership tag in there somewhere, but it feels more authentic than you as a brand promoting their content from your account, for example. So that was something that actually started on TikTok, that partnership thing, and it's now moved across to all of the other major platforms. You can do that anywhere now.
Yeah, I've noticed that a lot on Instagram in my lo-fi time when I'm sitting in bed and scrolling reels and sending them to my husband, who's laying right next to me. Anyway, next question. I'm not sure if TikTok and Instagram are worth advertising my industry, web, app development, etc. How do I know which platforms are good for which industry, or does this not matter? Good question.
Yeah. I would potentially challenge that thinking a little bit. So you're thinking like, web and app development, etc. You think about the people who you're trying to target with those ads. They're still going to be spending time on those platforms. It might not necessarily be your primary one. That might be more of a B2B focus. So you're using maybe a little bit of LinkedIn primarily for that, to talk to people when they're in a business focus. But I mean, I get ads for coding courses and marketing seminars and stuff on Instagram all the time. So it kind of goes back to that point that I mentioned before about, with such a fractured landscape of essentially the attention economy, being available in as many places as possible means that you're just getting your ads in front of people in as many different spaces. But in terms of actual concrete results, you kind of just have to test the different platforms and see which works in which space, right? There's not really any hard and fast answer to this, because every business is different, every audience is different. Really, the answers come from testing and iterative changes across multiple platforms to see which one gives you the best returns.
And in your estimation, when you're testing these, how much time would you give yourself? Would you go, oh, I'm going to test this for a month, or I'll test this for 3 months, or, just to see how engagement works and how conversion works?
I mean, I'd give it at least a minimum a month. Most of these platforms, when you create campaigns for them, they have in the background, they have an optimization cycle. So the longer you run them for, the more time they have to sort of sift through the results they're getting to give you the best answers. And for most of them, that optimization cycle in total is about 28 days to 30 days long. So we always run our campaigns behind the scenes campaigns will always run for at least a minimum of a month. If possible. If it has to be shorter, it has to be shorter. But generally speaking, run them for a month and still be doing iterative changes throughout that entire month as well. So for some industries or for some businesses, you may need to be changing your creative out, once every couple of weeks, potentially once a week even. But I wouldn't do it like every day. Making changes like that every day just kind of messes with the results that you get in general anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Okay, you talked about engagement not being as important anymore. What other metrics should we be highlighting instead?
That's a good question. And it basically ties back to, what are you actually trying to do? If the business objective you have is generating leads, or signing people up to a database or something like that, then that's the metric that you should focus on. If you're building a community, then obviously engagement rate is still important, because engagement rate gives you signals on how that particular audience has digested and resonated with a certain thing that you're talking about. But when we're talking about straight up business objectives, just tie them back to the activity that you're trying to do. Essentially, yeah.
Yeah, great. And then one more question here. I love these questions coming in. Thank you, everybody. Could you talk to us about budget on IG and TT especially? We know what those mean. When we're starting out, what will it cost, and how often should we post paid ads?
Right, so that's on Instagram and TikTok especially. When we're starting out, what will it cost and how often should we post paid ads? That's a tricky one. There's again no real hard and fast answer. We kind of work on at Mosh. If I'm talking about, like, say, just the everyday content that we put on our page, if you can afford to, we would probably recommend that you boost everything, even if it's just a little bit, even if it's only like $10 or $20. Primarily because if you don't boost, you don't get to choose who sees that content. So the only way that you can actually target an audience very specifically is by using the paid functions of the ads. And especially if you're working on, like, Instagram, for example, and TikTok to a lesser extent as well, but TikTok, it's a little bit easier to still go viral because of the way the algorithm works. But on Instagram, for example, if you're just posting organically, the percentage of people that you reach organically is very low on purpose, right? Meta pushes down the amount of organic reach that any advertiser can get because they want you to pay for it. So I know on Facebook, I don't know the specific numbers for Instagram, but you post a piece of content on Facebook, you can reliably imagine that about 2 to 10% of your followers will get delivered that piece of content. And if you're like 75% of New Zealand businesses that have 1,000 followers or less, you're in like sort of, the 10 to 100 range of people who are going to get delivered your content organically, at least initially. And potentially there's an argument there that, okay, I've spent all this time and energy creating this content to be seen by 50 people, or I could spend $10 and get it in front of 1,000 people that I choose, right? So that's kind of why we kind of recommend boosting as much as possible. For ads, Meta, like these platforms will give you recommended minimum spends based on like what you're trying to do and how long you're trying to do it for. Certain objectives have, just by their very nature, higher costs to execute. So driving website traffic is cheaper than creating a campaign to drive for purchases, for example. It's a much harder thing to get somebody to do. It's a much higher value result at the end of it. Therefore, your cost per result tends to be higher. So they will give you recommendations based on when you set the campaign up. I would stick with those at least to start with, and then start scaling upwards from there once you kind of get the results trickling in to see what actually works.
Great, thank you. And then we have
we've got this question from Sandra, because I can see it as well. How do you rate Meta dynamic ads for a retail site owner? We have been working with, so these dynamic product ads, for those of you who don't use them, essentially you have a product catalog that you can sync with your e-commerce website, and then basically say to Meta, here's a list of all of my products, or here's a list of a certain set kind of products. Deliver these to this target audience, and it'll basically mix and match the products to give you a carousel of the products it thinks that that person's most likely to want to buy, and it does it all dynamically. So you don't actually have to, create the ads themselves. You write a little bit of copy and you choose the targeting. Kind of the system does the rest of it itself. They work pretty well. They're very situational, and they rely on you having sort of a healthy amount of e-com activity already happening. So any of these conversion optimizations on any of these platforms, they're fed by the information of people who are already doing that thing. So if you've got, minimum of like 50 purchases a week happening, that's kind of the minimum amount of data that Meta will look for so it'll analyze all of those people, look at their profiles, look at their activities and stuff, and try and figure out, okay, what is it about all of these people that's made them want to purchase this product from this particular retailer? And then I will use that information to target more people who look similar to them or with similar habits. So I do rate them, but you do have to do some hard work at the start to build that sort of traffic of flow of commerce already. Starting from zero with dynamic product ads is just, you're not going to scale. The system's not going to know who to actually deliver the ads to, and you will struggle. We're seeing it work really well as with some of the bigger e-com retailers that we work with. We kind of split it between prospecting audiences and remarketing audiences. So like say we want to remarket everybody who's visited our site, looked at products but not made a purchase. They work quite well there to try and either to bring people back in for abandoned cart sales. But it also works really well at a prospecting level, providing you've got that, you can put your whole product set or specific product sets up there, and it will just go out and find the right people. One trick, or one little trap to be aware of when you're doing conversion optimized ads, however, is to make sure you're aware of the attribution window that Meta uses. So by default, Meta will basically look at your ad, look at the results that are coming from your ads, and it will attribute that sale to your ads if they've either viewed that ad in the last 7 days or clicked on it in the last 1 day. Contrast that with a platform like Google Analytics, where you'll see a mismatch because Google Analytics uses last touch attribution. So it'll look at the last place that person came from. But you can imagine a purchase flow of someone sees your ad on Meta, thinks about it, goes, oh yeah, that's cool. Oh, I've got to go into a meeting. Google's that same thing later on in the day, clicks on that search result, goes and makes a purchase. Meta attributes it to them because you looked at it less than 7 days ago. Google attributes it to organic search because they came from a search result. What we can do to be as conservative as possible with those results is you can change your attribution window when you're looking at your results to say something like just look at, say, 1-day click results, and be really conservative on that to sort of see where the returns are actually coming from. You might find quite a big difference in something like your return on ad spend based on a 7-day attribution window versus a 1-day one. You might see quite a big difference there. So just be aware of that. Yeah, people are always like, why does my Google Analytics not match my Facebook? It's like, because they're using 2 different models to actually attribute sales. Cool. Shall I keep going with my little slides while more questions come in? Cool. So LinkedIn, surprisingly, second largest platform in New Zealand. We can see here 2.5 million, bigger than Instagram. They kind of go back and forth in terms of audience size, but you can see they're growing 200,000 users year on year compared to Instagram losing 250,000. Sorry, before I go, I'm just going to go back one slide and just note something a little bit interesting here. You mentioned like, where are all the people who are leaving going? We see TikTok grew by about 190,000 and Instagram dropped by about 250. I would say that that's probably not unnecessarily correlated there. But yes, LinkedIn, primary B2B, and sort of it's becoming much more of like also a personal branding platform now. So you'll find that a lot of business comms on LinkedIn come from individuals and thought leaders within an organization rather than just from the organization itself. So for those of us who are in small, sort of medium to larger businesses where you might have, people who have their own sort of professional network or as subject matter experts in their own field working within a larger organization, a good strategy could be there to leverage their knowledge and their networks rather than just driving everything through your business page. You'll find that a combination of those people will have a much higher reach than just a business page or even doing promoted stuff. And you can even do things as maybe as a social media lead within an organization. LinkedIn actually has an employee advocacy tool built into the company pages platform. So you can put content into this employee advocacy tool. It doesn't go anywhere apart from to the people who work at your business, and they can pick and choose to share that out to their wider audience and add their own thoughts to it. Has 2 benefits, right? Helps them build their own personal brand as a subject matter expert, helps you as a business get your voice out there through another subject matter expert rather than just brands shouting to people, which is a relatively low volume or low value messaging on marketing as opposed to people talking to people.
Can we answer this question here?
Yeah.
Got a quick. What are your thoughts on de-influencing trends? Does this mean we should be spending less time editing video content to look professional and keep it looking more organic? I mean, does that depend on your audience really, and like who you're trying to reach? I feel like that's what that would be.
On your brand as well, right? Like if you're a high-end luxury brand like a Lexus or a Gucci or something like that, there may be space for that sort of a little bit lower, less professional looking content. But it is situational. So, you could have a combination of the brand itself, all of your brand messaging still being quite high end, quite luxe, quite professional looking. But then if you're working with, third-party content creators to do that sort of people selling to people piece, obviously you don't want to influence what their content looks like because they already have their style and that's what their audience comes to expect from them. So, when it comes to engaging with third-party influencers or content creators, it's much better to let them be as natural to their style as possible, as opposed to sort of enforcing a messaging, enforcing a style on them. But yeah, does this mean we should be spending less time editing video content to look professional and keep it looking more organic? 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. It will be very situational depending on your brand and your audience. Sorry, I know I'm giving a lot of like wishy-washy answers that say like, it depends and maybe, and you should try this. But that's kind of, unfortunately, that's the nature.
I know. It depends.
It's changing all the time. So.
And it's your business. It depends on what is your business? What is your branding? What are you selling? Who are you selling to? What are you trying to get out there? What's in your heart? So.
Yeah, definitely. Like going back to first principles and just thinking about, what is it that my audience wants from me? social, especially like compared to a lot of other digital platforms, is all about like a positive value exchange. We're working in spaces where people are primarily not there actually to hear from brands. They're primarily there to be entertained, to be catching up with the news, catching up with friends and family. Like the actual, the number of people who say their primary reason for using social media is to see content from brands or to look at things to do and buy is relatively low on the scale of why they're on the platform in the first place. So providing some sort of positive value exchange, whether that just be something like educating them about your product or your industry, entertaining them. A lot of FMCG brands will go down the road of providing edutainment style content because there is no direct path to purchase, right? You're just trying to make people remember you so that when they see you on the supermarket shelf, they choose you over the other instant noodles that are sitting next to you, right? So it's not, it's kind of six of one, half a dozen of the other there. Sorry.
No, and it makes sense. No, it's what you're saying is we're not going on social media platforms to be sold to. It's the same way it was back in my day, before I told everyone to get off my lawn. We were watching telly and that's it. And then you've got advertisers popping in while you're watching your show, and you're supposed to remember Pepsi. You're supposed to remember who else is showing up, Whitaker's, whoever's coming up on your screen at that moment, but you just want to get back to your sitcom. You just want to watch what you were watching. Same thing here. So that's what we want to do, is we want to get in with our advertising, and we want to just go, oh, remember us, we were funny. Remember us, we were cute, whatever it was. Remember us, we make you feel good. So yeah.
And that kind of ties back to that TikTok thing that I mentioned before, is that you'll see a lot of the content that works really well there is edutainment style. So it's teaching you something, whether it's educating you about a product, subject, whatever, but doing it in a way that's interesting and entertaining. The analogy that I always use to illustrate this point is everybody's newsfeed or their social media feeds are essentially like a house party, right? They're inviting people in to be entertaining, interesting, conversational. You as a brand don't want to be the person that turns up and just spends all night talking about yourself, because what happens is you don't get invited back to the next party and people just stop listening and go talk to somebody else who's more interesting. So that's not necessarily the be all and end all. Like straight up advertising and driving business objectives, obviously it's going to be, a sales an advertising exercise. But the sort of the everyday business as usual style stuff that you'll be doing, the stuff that goes on your page, for example, as opposed to what lives in the advertising space, you want to try and have that two-way. It's your opportunity to have that two-way dialogue with your audience rather than just shouting your sales messaging into the void constantly.
Yeah, I love that house party analogy. That's brilliant. And I'm going to take this moment actually, because we are talking about where you're saying, oh, it could be this or it could be that. Sign up for Ollie's workshop. We've got a workshop where we're just going to do social media 101. It's December 14th. And I will say this again at the end, but December 14th, make sure that you sign up and RSVP for that workshop. So even if you can't attend, you get the recording. We're going to be going over all of that. And if you can show up, we have that intimate setting where Ollie can directly speak to you, Karen, or anyone else who's on this call and asking questions specifically about your business. And we can really get to the nitty gritty of like, oh, okay, Karen, should you be doing less editing on your videos? Maybe for you, yeah. And we can find that out on December 14th. I know it's getting close to the holidays, but it's not the holidays yet. So show up and be there. I'll be there.
Oh, lovely little plug there. Right, let's move on.
All right, Ollie, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's all good. So the final platform that I'll dive into is X, formerly known as Twitter. I can never get used to calling it X. This is a very situational platform in New Zealand, very small, 791,000, although you can see here that they've had a massive growth. They've added about 43% active users year on year. Primarily, that's basically people logging on to watch the house burn down. It's not.
I was going to say, I'm really surprised by this. I mean, we won't get into our own personal feelings about this, but I thought, oh my God, 43%, like literally had to.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah. So, 240,000 new users in New Zealand, but I think, and it was kind of a trend. This is obviously to January this year. I would be very surprised if that growth trend continued year on year. I would imagine at January 2024, we'll basically see this back down to either the levels it was last year or even lower. It's kind of very much dropped out of favor. There are still situational users for it, though, sort of some very specific or global industries still use this quite a lot, and global thought leaders based out of New Zealand still, and so it gets primarily like politicos, journos, and a lot of like global industries still use it quite heavily. Yeah, in terms of advertising on it though, I mean, everybody's heard the stories about, their advertising revenue has dropped by like 50-60% because everybody just doesn't want to be associated with the kind of people that are now using the platform primarily. So just be mindful of the fact that it is a very different landscape than it was 2 years ago. So yeah, but in terms of any sort of like into New Zealand advertising, it's kind of fell out of favor a little bit. It might be another channel that you kind of have just as another touch point, but it wouldn't necessarily be your primary one. Cool. So that's kind of all of the specific platforms that I wanted to go over. Were there any more questions before I do a little bit more of a spiel of the different, what I kind of wanted to do is go over the different advertising objectives themselves and just kind of give a little bit of a sort of under the hood explanation of how they work, sort of how they deliver. The way they get named doesn't necessarily tell us exactly how they work. So understanding the mechanisms can help us make the right choices when actually using the paid media side of things.
Yeah, that sounds great. I don't see any questions right now, but please, as they come in, we will ask them. So yeah, go for it.
All right, I'll kick into it. So again, I'm going to use Meta examples here primarily because it's probably the platform that most of us are most familiar with, but also the principles of the different advertising objectives, broadly speaking, will translate across to the other platforms that we might use. So they split their objectives, broadly speaking, into sort of 3 levels of your marketing funnel, right? So you've got brand awareness at the top, consideration in the middle, conversion at the bottom. So the brand awareness objectives that we get given from Meta, there's 2 of them. They get called brand awareness or reach. Essentially speaking, what they do is 2 slightly different things. So brand awareness is essentially designed to deliver your ad, your content, whatever that may be, to the people within your target audience that Meta believes will remember seeing your content after 48 hours. So contrast it to, say, something like reach, which is primarily designed to deliver it to as many unique people as possible. Brand awareness will actually deliver to a smaller subsection of your target audience, but it will deliver more impressions, so your ads will appear to them more times. But it's delivering it to the people that it thinks will remember seeing it. And it measures that by doing some exit surveys. Some of you may have seen, if you log into your Facebook app at the top of your feed, there's a little questionnaire saying, hey, do you remember seeing this piece of content? Yes or no? That's because you've been delivered it and it's trying to figure out if you remember seeing it. So that gets delivered to a small subsection of the audience that gets sent your ad. And then that, along with a bunch of machine learning and complicated math, it makes its best estimate of the number of people that they believe remember seeing your ad. And it gives you that as a metric called ad recall lift. It is very much a homebrew metric specific to Meta. Not many of the other platforms really do something like this. So take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, but it's their effort to try and sort of close the return on investment gap that's always existed for brand awareness activity. It's very hard to measure brand awareness, right? Because how do you get inside someone's head and know if they're aware of you or not? So it's always been a challenge for marketing in general, but social media specifically, it's quite a challenge to measure that, and that's what they're trying to do here. Contrast that with reach. Reach has, on the surface, right, reach sounds really good. Deliver your ads to as many people as possible, and for the lowest possible cost. So I can reach, to 250,000 people for $500. Excellent. However, it's not going to deliver it to them multiple times. So because it's trying to reach more people rather than drive more impressions. So for those of us who are I'm using buzzwords here. So reach is the unique number of people that you've delivered your content to. Impressions are the number of times in total that's being delivered. So reach will always be a subset of impressions, right? With a reach objective, you'll generally deliver maybe 1, maybe 2 impressions to every person in that audience. So depending on how compelling or interesting your content is, that will determine whether they actually remember seeing you or not just the raw number of people that it gets delivered to. So it's a 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Works really well for brands that have already existing brand recognition. So you think like a McDonald's, a Starbucks, a Coca-Cola. You put that logo in front of somebody once, they already are triggered in remembering who that is because they know that logo off the top of their head. For some of us smaller businesses that don't have that recognition, potentially reach might be something that we want to not necessarily use as much because there's not as much algorithmic targeting to it. And delivering an impression once to one person, is that really going to drive brand awareness? How do we know? There's not really any real way of knowing outside of 6 months down the track after consistently doing reach and awareness activity for 6 months. Do we see any lift in business outcomes? And we could potentially tie that back to this. But so it's be very situational and very much understand that there's very little targeting being done with this reach objective. I see a lot of brands using it a lot, and I think there's better ways to drive brand awareness as an activity than just delivering your ad to a lot of people. Now, before I move on, there was one. Oh yeah, the April 2023 report says Twitter's ad reach has dropped to 526,000 by now. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a very interesting situation. Still very situational, but yeah, I'm not surprised by that number at all.
It's interesting because it's just 4 months, right? It's just like,
yeah, exactly. Oh, there's some delicious Schadenfreude to be had there, but also it's sad that for all its foibles, Twitter was a valuable platform, and now it's just anyway. So the next level down, we have our consideration level objectives. So these are all of the things now we're trying to get people to try and take a certain action. A lot of these objectives will have a much higher frequency, so it will deliver more impressions to a smaller audience. So, for example, let's go through these. Traffic. So traffic, generally speaking, in social media terms, traffic is just trying to get people to click on a link, go to your website, right? On Meta specifically, they've got two options here. You can either optimize for link clicks, which is just get as many clicks on that link as possible. And that's kind of a bulk quantity style objective. Very easy to do. However, potentially you might see a little bit of, a lot of link clicks with quite a few less actual views on your landing page, because all that Meta cares about is getting people to click the link. What happens after that, they don't really care about. That's why they introduced the second metric under here, which is landing page views, which is delivering your ad to people who are going to click the link and wait for the content to load. Requires you to have the Metapixel installed to be able to see that, because obviously they need to see what's happening on the website end. So if you don't have a Metapixel installed, or if you just want to try and drive as much traffic as possible, maybe try link clicks. If you're wanting to be a bit more targeting and get high quality people on to view this content, landing page views might be the way to do it there. Just try both. So, do some A/B testing and test one against the other, and that will give you a good idea about whether link clicks might just be easier to use. There was a question here.
Yeah, so it's because so many New Zealand businesses were interrupted by Meta pulling Insta and Facebook shop function locally. Are there any timelines if or when we will get it back? I don't know if we have the answer to that.
My recommendation to small businesses is always to never be reliant on a third-party platform to host your business. So basically treat it as if it's never coming back and make plans to make changes because of that. I would always recommend for any business, no matter how big or small, is to have a website that you can use social as a driver to, whether it be e-commerce sales or just traffic or whatever. You can still use the catalog functionality, like not so much tagging products, for example, but you've got your dynamic product sales ads, etc., that you can use in conjunction with a website, or even you can do conversion-based ads that have just automatic click through to your e-commerce site, etc. Like, don't rely on these tech companies to be the be-all and end-all of your business, essentially. So yeah, treat it like it's not happening and make plans to work around that.
And it's so easy to make websites these days, like real simple. You can just make a real simple website. There are lots of platforms out there. Rocket Spark is one that's here in New Zealand. And,
exactly. Yeah, Squarespace, Wix, whatever, WooCommerce, like Shopify has their own website building platform now. Like it's never been easier to build and host your own website, especially e-commerce sites. So just have a look at that.
Mm-hmm.
Then going through engagement, that gets split out into a couple of different options. Post engagement, obviously, that's about driving people to engage with a specific piece of content. Keep in mind that the success of a post engagement campaign will still be the content. Don't use paid optimizations like this as a way to shortcut bad content, because even if you use a post engagement objective, if your content sucks, they're still not going to engage with it in rates that they would do if it was better. So keep that in mind. Page likes, that's trying to build your page following. This is a specific one to Facebook, although TikTok are now starting to experiment with this as well. So you can optimize to increase your page followers there. It's basically just delivering your ads to the people most likely to want to follow you for more information. In terms of why you would want to do that, mainly nowadays, the size of your account is like a social proof metric, right? It's about showing that you have a large number of people who have validated you as a content provider they want to follow. Because if we go back to that idea of people using Facebook or TikTok as a search engine, they search for your product or services and 2 pages come up, yours and your competitors. You have 50 followers, they have 500 or 5,000. Their lizard brain's going to go, well, the bigger number's better, so I'm going to go look at these guys instead of you. So there's potentially an idea to use that just as a way to get yourself up into sort of that triple or quad digit follower numbers. It won't necessarily have a massive amount of influence on the number of people that you can reach, but potentially it might just be a way to get yourself up into those numbers competitor wise. It's not really one that you always have to use, but just that's what it does. Event responses, that's just essentially trying to get people to engage with an event. The reason why I've highlighted it here is that events kind of get underutilized quite a lot. Events are really good for sort of creating audience data and segmenting people into different interests based, right? If you have an event that's around a certain subject matter, a music genre, whatever that may be, anybody who engages with that has signaled their interest in that particular thing. It's a little piece of insight on those particular people that you can use in the future. All of these optimizations, but event responses especially, right? They're all about generating what we call remarketing touch points. So you can create custom audiences based around all of these different actions. People who engage with your content, people who react or engage with an event, people who follow your page, they can all be put into little audiences and retargeted, but also you can use those audiences to create larger audiences of people who look like them. That's what lookalike audiences actually are. It's taking, anybody who's engaged with this event, find me more people like them. I won't go into the details of those because I'm just realizing we're getting a little bit short on time, so I'll kick through these real quick. But yeah, if you want to get more into those weeds, come through to the workshop in December and we'll go into that in much more detail. Video views, does what it says on the tin, get views on the video. This is potentially one that I would recommend trying as a brand awareness objective. So it's not necessarily still going to reach hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, but video content is very much the sort of content style of the day. Everybody's going on, is using more video on these platforms more and more. It's also a really good way to tell a much more complicated brand story in that one impression, right? If you're only going to reach somebody once, it's better to reach them with a video than with a static because you can tell a better story. It's more interesting and they're potentially going to remember it better. So having like a real, like your brand explainer video and promoting it for video views could be a really good way of promoting brand awareness. Plus, it also gives you a remarketing touch point to talk to those people again later down the track. Sorry, I'll breeze through these. Lead generation, essentially, this is trying to get information from your audience so that you can contact them in the future. So usually it's in the form of a name, email address, and a phone number. Those are kind of the basic ones that everybody asks for. Could be something as simple as sign up for my newsletter. Do you want to hear more from me? Give us your name, email address, and we'll pop you into our newsletter database. Really good way of building customer databases that you can use for your EDM marketing, a whole bunch of other cool stuff that you can do with that. Do it right, like potentially you might even want to incentivize them with a small prize. Sign up for our newsletter, go in the draw to win a $50 Prezi card. That works really well. And you can get cost per results down sort of around the dollar mark, like $1 per lead, and potentially those can be quite valuable in the future. And then finally, the conversion level objectives. So these are conversions are essentially basically saying, I'm going to define an action on my website And most of us will be thinking purchases of an e-commerce thing, but it can be anything, right? Anything that you can define as an action, you can optimize to find more people to do that action. Again, provided that it's happening. So even something as simple as filling out a form, subscribing for a subscription service, making a purchase, adding to cart, initiating checkouts. Like, you can define all of these different actions on your website, and then the system will track who's doing all of those. And then you say, find me, when you do a conversion campaign, to find me more people to do this sort of thing. Again, it will require you to have the Metapixel, and very much so now these days, the Facebook Conversions API. So the Metapixel is very soon going to be not anywhere near as useful as it used to be. It's already not as useful as it used to be, but it's going to get even more so when Google enact their privacy first policy. So basically, Google Chrome is going to stop allowing the Facebook Pixel to transmit data back to Meta. So what they've basically done is they've created the Conversions API, which shifts that tracking from browser side to server side. If you have a website that has it already, that doesn't have that Conversions API set up, do a bit of Googling and figure out how to get it installed on your particular provider. It will potentially involve your web devs a little bit, depending on which provider that you use. But it's kind of critical that now you start getting that installed ahead of this change coming. Otherwise, your Metapixel is going to become very much almost useless going forward.
And is that a Google Conversions API? Is that what you said?
That's
no.
the Meta Conversions API.
The Meta, yeah.
Yeah. If you just Google Meta Conversions API, you'll find the documentation and instructions on how to get it done.
Ugh, so much shifting.
Yeah. I mean, you can look at it as a good thing though, right? Like, yes, it makes our job as marketers harder, but at least we're shifting to a more privacy-centric internet, which is nice.
Absolutely. Quick question here. Are hashtags still relevant?
Get this question every time I do one of these courses. Yes, but it depends on what platform you're on. Instagram, absolutely. Still very much a core part of the user experience is browsing through hashtags, etc. But have a strategy for building yourself a big list of different hashtags that are related to your brand, but also the types of content that you post, and sort of segregate them out by the number of uses they have, right? So you could have a list of like 10 to 15 hashtags that have been used more than 1 million times, another 10 to 15 for like 500,000 to 1 million, like create a big list, and then basically pick and choose, between 10 to 15 per post across those different usage levels. And use those. It just gives you a nice number of hashtags to use, but also different levels of discoverability. So it's a minor thing, but for Instagram especially, it's still a major part of the actual user experience. TikTok, still use them as well, absolutely. LinkedIn, to a little bit of a lesser extent, people can actually follow hashtags on LinkedIn, so it is a core user functionality. Facebook, don't bother. Nobody browses through hashtags on Facebook, so just don't.
And then how many hashtags per post should we use? You said about 10 to 15?
Yeah, for Instagram, the kind of that sweet spot is between sort of 10 to 15. You can have a maximum of 30, but that's also just an absolute pain in the behind to try and come up with 30 hashtags, because you also want to be mixing them up. You don't want to use the same 30 all the time. It gets a bit repetitive and the system doesn't like that. For TikTok, I think you can use up to 100, but between 5 and 7 is enough for TikTok. Same for LinkedIn. Choose sort of like 3 to 5 of the core ones, and leave it at that.
Great. Thank you.
Now the catalog sales, actually I will ignore that one because as we talked about, that's kind of gone away now. So that's kind of it. I think I'll stop there. I could go on, but I won't because I know everybody cognizant of everybody's time.
No, I know. I love this. So, Ollie and I got on earlier and he's like, I'm just going to talk for 20 minutes and then we'll see if we have questions. And there's just so much we can talk about. That was the thing. There's so much we can talk about, Ollie, and your knowledge is vast. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing it with us. I can't wait for December 14th. We can really get in there. We've got a 2-hour workshop. I already said it. Make sure that you sign up and RSVP for it on our platform. If you have any questions, Ollie, how do we reach out to you? LinkedIn or what's the easiest?
Yeah, by all means, hit me up on LinkedIn. You can, if you've got sort of any general questions that you want to direct through the agency, just the contact us page on our website as well. If you want to use that, that'll fire emails through as well. But yeah, or if you have any specific questions about this session, feel free to email Georgia and she can pass those questions on. I'm quite happy to answer any questions.
Absolutely. Yeah, come over to Digital Boost. We're at support@digitalboost.co.nz. You know how to find us. There's always someone there checking your questions. And then if they have questions for me, it always gets sent over to me. So thanks everyone for tuning in, for wherever you're tuning in from. Come back on Thursday for the workshop we have this Thursday, and come back, which I should know what that is. And I'm not prepared to tell you what that is, but it's on the platform. Oh, but Ollie's workshop is going to be the 14th of December. I've said it before. I'll say it again. Thank you. And I will see you all soon. Matewa.
Have a great day, everyone.